And you should now have gotten a thing saying, letting you know that it's recording.
Okay. So I guess I should introduce myself.
Well, I'm just going to quickly introduce the session generally and say, welcome to Courageous Parents Network in the Zoom room. Live conversations about parents, what parents really wonder about, including the very, very personal and fraught decision about whether to have another child, or whether to have another child and how to have another child after you learn that you are a carrier for a serious genetic condition, which was true certainly of myself, and I know also Jennifer. And this is true for many, many families in Courageous Parents Network. We are very lucky to have Jennifer Seidman, who works at CPN, with us today, not just because she works at CPN, but because of her own experience, and Mary Frances Garber, who is featured across CPN in our genetic counseling unit and has done some private virtual counseling to some families through a grant that Courageous Parents Network got. So welcome both of you, and I will hand it off to Jennifer.
So I was going to do this long introduction to Mary Frances, but I'll be a little briefer since we're such a small group. Mary was not my genetic counselor after the diagnosis of my son. I wish that she was, because I can assuredly tell you that experience and the weeks following it would have probably played out significantly different. However, I am extraordinarily fortunate that Mary is my friend and my sorority sister. And so Mary and I really reconnected after my son Benjamin was diagnosed with a lysosomal storage disorder. And she was instrumental in helping me sit down and sort out some of the complex feelings that I was having around. I think I was having anticipatory grief, but I just didn't know that word back then. And so she was helpful in helping me sort those out. I can remember telling Mary about one instance where it was probably about 7 weeks after my son's diagnosis, and I found myself crying uncontrollably, and when I finally could say the words about why I was crying, it was because I was crying for all the eggs that were never to come and all the children that I wasn't going to have because I wanted to have a big family. And Mary helped me reframe the way I was thinking about that and shape it into something where I felt in control of the decision that I was about to make. And then at the time, she happened to be working at the high-risk unit at the Brigham and was able to connect me with a physician who could find and search out some of the advancing reproductive technologies that were coming, because this experience is now 20. My daughter is 21, so this is 21-year-old experience. But I did eventually go on to have another child, another biological child, and I'm so thankful that Mary was there to support me through it. And I know I'm looking forward to seeing her presentation, and want to be a resource for the other parents and counselors here with us today. So Mary, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I'll just start out with thanking Blythe and Jennifer and CPN for allowing me today to share some of my thoughts and some of my experience and counsel that I've been privileged to learn from the families that I support. You know, we go to school to be genetic counselors, and you learn it, you know, in those 2 years and in the textbooks and in the role playing. And then when you're lucky enough to do it for 32 years, you like soak it up like a sponge, and you become a better counselor from the patients you've been able to help. And I tell a lot of my patients that, you know, I am privileged to have a friend a mile down the road who made me into a better counselor. And that's from my experience of knowing Jennifer and Stuart, she didn't share that the four of us went to college together, our husbands and the two of us. And so, and our kids are all the same ages. And so just having that experience, knowing and loving Ben and watching them parent with so much love and struggle through this journey and step forward, you know, has allowed me to take better care of a lot of the patients that come my way. So I entitled my talk, Shall We Grow Our Family? Because I really feel like, you know, it's sort of a soft, the way I thought of it was sort of, it was soft. Shall we grow our family? Shall we have another child? Not, you know, should we try again? And so I want to talk with you a little bit about this today. But before we talk about, should we have another child? I thought we should spend a little bit of time talking about what happens after the diagnosis. And that whether it's your first child or your middle child, or wherever that child who has a genetic condition or who has a medical condition, if you don't even know that it's genetic, falls in the SIB-ship, it really is the before and the after. And when you receive the diagnosis, then there are different stages that you have to go through. And so initially you're processing grief, right? You're mourning the loss of a typical child that maybe for a while you thought you had a typical child, and then you realize something is not quite right, and you go through maybe a diagnostic odyssey, and then you get a diagnosis. And so there's that period of processing that grief. And that can be, you know, short or a little bit longer, depending on how you do. A lot of this always depends upon who are we as individuals. Am I a girl with an anxious personality? Well, maybe I'm going to struggle a little bit longer. Do I have a little bit of past history of mental health challenges, or does my partner? So that period can be unique to the patient or the couple. And after that comes this period of adjustment. And you sort of might start to get the hang of things. You know your team, your medical team, you know your providers. Maybe there are therapists that start to come to the house. Maybe you adjust your work schedule. And so you go from grieving to starting to step forward in terms of adjustment a little bit. And then there's like what I call the new normal. Like your life, either as 3 people or 4 people or 5 people, however many are in your home, starts to have this new normal, and you might get the hang of it. You know your appointments are on the calendar, and maybe there's a special diet, or maybe you're immunocompromised and you have to be careful about that. But this new normal sets in. And then you're functioning as a family unit. Like you're doing it. Maybe it's not the family that you thought you were going to have, but you are functioning as a family unit. And it's that time, I think, for some people, that desire starts to creep in. Should we have another child? Should we grow our family? Because now you're adjusted somewhat and you realize this is how we are. Shall we have another child? That's when I think people start to think about it. And so the question about whether or not to have another child, I think it's complicated. I think it brings in a range of emotions. And I think it is unique to every couple that I get to take care of and to each member of the couple. So it's not like this short-term decision or a quick answer. I believe it takes a lot of thinking and listening and weighing risks, the known versus the unknown. For some people that I take care of, they know there's a 25% chance this could happen again. That's known. They have a diagnosis, they know the inheritance pattern, they know the gene, and maybe there's even some testing available that they know about. Versus some people have a child maybe with a life-limiting illness or a variety of anomalies or birth defects or conditions, and they don't have a recurrence risk that they can weigh. And there might not be an answer of how do we test for this? or would this happen again for sure? And so I put the known versus the unknown because, again, it's unique and it's complicated. When I work with couples, and I take care of some people for, not just 1 or 2 visits, but for years as we travel through all of this, initially there's fear. First, even after the adjustment, there's this fear that this could happen again. And I don't know that I want to go back in the water and all of these things. And the anxiety and the fear is really, really real. And then there's like this little hint of a desire, or I want to hold another baby. I want to have a baby that's going to be okay. And so that desire starts to creep into the mix. And sometimes it's different, in a same-sex couple. Sometimes, even though people are of the same gender, still desire and fear don't weigh the same way. And then in not a same-sex couple, men tend to be a little bit more methodical in their thinking. I'm stereotyping right now, I know it. Methodical in their thinking, the Y chromosome is a certain way, and women are more emotional and they need more processing and they sway back and forth. And it's sort of like that nice little scale, Jennifer and I like to go antiquing, and you might find one of those scales, and at first the fear is way over here and the desire is much lighter. And then eventually, after talking and listening and understanding, maybe the desire starts to be the heavier emotion. And so while the words in this bubble might not be pre-implantation genetic testing or prenatal diagnosis or leaving it up to fate, I still liked it because the sun is coming up behind these women. And so day is breaking, dawn is coming, or actually I guess it could be setting. I never thought of it that way till I was just talking with you, but I think the sun is coming up and it's a new day, and these are their thoughts. Everyone is wondering, should we have prenatal testing? Should I do the screening, et cetera, et cetera. And so it just shows you that there's no one right way to think about this. So how do couples start to entertain the decision and make the decision? I've already told you, I don't think there's no one right answer for all of the couples. And at the same time, I don't want people to think that the decision you make in January might be the same decision you make in August after revisiting it, or after life changes that might happen in your life, not even related to your child. So the decision can change. There's not one right answer. And you have to understand that. And you have to look at this as, we're going to make the best decision we can with what we have. And so I try to counsel my patients to entertain the decision. And in school, we talked about wearing a hat. And so sometimes I say to my couple after a session, today I want you to go home, and the hat I want you to put on is, we're going to conceive with IVF, we're going to do pre-implantation genetic testing, and that way we pretty much have it assured that the embryo that is implanted or transferred is unaffected. How does that feel to you? Scientific, calculated, months of IVF, preparation, building the probes for this. Wear that hat. Is that comfortable, uncomfortable? Change the hat. Change the hat. We're going to do prenatal testing. We're going to conceive on our own. And we know that at 10 or at 15 weeks, depending on the test that we choose, we will have prenatal diagnosis. And then we'll be faced with a difficult decision maybe. How does that hat feel? And we do this a little bit, and then maybe they come back and tell me how it felt and process that with a trained ear. So entertaining the decision. And another skill, I want you to look 5 to 10 years out. Some people know that their child has a life-limiting illness, and maybe they know the lifespan is 10 to 14 years or 14 to 20 years. And so wherever you are in that journey, look 5 years out, look 10 years out. Who is sitting around the dining room table? Who is in the kitchen? How many people do you envision? What about the surviving sibling? What do you envision for him or her? And so really projecting. And between entertaining the decision and projecting, looking down the road, they're visual. They're visual, and they're helpful ways to think about this. And then sitting on the couch with your partner, talking. What are our goals? Is this a desire for us as parents and a couple? Is this something for the sibling? Is this for the family at large? You know, what's behind this as we think about this decision? Whose goals are we trying to meet? And then managing anxiety and fear, because they can be real. Like, it takes a lot of hand-holding sometimes to give couples the confidence to step down whatever fork in this decision-making process they're going to be going. And so seeking counsel or seeking support, it doesn't mean you're weak if you need to talk with a provider about this. It means you need insight and understanding and talk back so that you can be told what you're thinking. Somebody else hears it and relays it back to you. So there are different options when we think about enlarging our family. I mentioned them briefly, but just to go through them a little bit. For some people, they, you know, if they are maybe pro-life and would not want to interrupt a pregnancy, they might want to start earlier with things and try to, through IVF and through assisted reproductive technology, take that part of the decision away and really try to create an embryo that is not affected, a child that's not affected with the condition that is at hand. It doesn't mean we wouldn't have a child with a different condition. It means that we are trying to prevent that from conceiving and transferring a pregnancy that is not affected. Some people, without even going to pre-implantation genetic testing, if it's a recessive condition where both members of the couple are carriers and have that 25% risk, they might choose to use a donor egg or a donor sperm. To maybe that person is also, that donor has been screened to see if they're a carrier for the condition, and if they are not a carrier, using that to conceive through IVF. Other people want biological children, so they would do the IVF with their own egg and sperm and use the pre-implantation genetic testing to hopefully select an embryo that is not affected. And I say hopefully because sometimes, you know, when you go through assisted reproductive technology, they also screen for chromosome anomalies, and then they also screen for unbalanced embryos in other senses as well. And then you're left with a few embryos that you're going to try to see through checking a cell, is the condition at hand present or not? And hopefully you'll have some left to transfer. So that is a journey. I mean, assisted reproductive technology is a journey in itself. Many times people need support and counseling during that road. For other couples, they say, nope, we are just gonna, we have no problem getting pregnant. Why do we want to go through IVF? We can get pregnant. We do it very easily. We're going to get pregnant. And then we'll either have a chorionic villus sampling, which is a biopsy of the placenta, or an amniocentesis. And we will test for the condition with a sample from in the pregnancy and send it to the lab and find our result that way. And then those couples may be faced with a difficult decision. Some people might decide to interrupt their pregnancy if the pregnancy is affected. Other people might change their mind and say, you know what, I don't think I can do that after all, but at least they know ahead of time. They have some forewarning and they can prepare. So prenatal diagnosis doesn't always mean ending a pregnancy. It means you want to know while you're pregnant. And then there's like a third camp, and many people do this. They do it. We're going to cross our fingers. We're going to leave it up to God. We don't want to, you know, get all involved here with all these other things. We're just going to do this. And there are reasons behind that. I always ask, could you tell me a little bit about why you're choosing this option versus that option? And then they tell you, and then you understand. And it's, you know, it's always good to say, can you tell me a little bit about, and have some insight into a couple's decision. And when I ask my couple, can you tell me a little bit about it? And then they start talking, then they hear themselves, and then they have some insight into the decision that they're making as well. So cautionary tales, and I think this is important. You know, I am working with a mother right now, and she says to me, I don't want this. And when she says that, she means the condition. She doesn't mean she doesn't want that baby, that child with the condition. And making sure that my mothers and fathers understand, separate the condition from the child. And so I bring it up because when you say, I don't want this, and you mean the condition, it goes the next step as people are thinking about growing their family, that they have to sort of sit with that and understand choosing not to have another child who is affected doesn't mean you wouldn't choose that baby sitting in that stroller or in that car seat. They are two different things. And so with this can come a little bit of confusion and tugging at your heart and needing to process, what am I doing here? You know, and we even see that, I'll just ad lib here for a minute. You know, we see this as genetic counselors sometimes when you have a couple in front of you, and let's just say the father has a condition, a dominant condition, and he lives with it every day. Let's just use neurofibromatosis as a common genetic condition. And because he has it, all of his children would have a 50% chance of having it. And so here's your couple, and he's going, I don't want to have a child with NF. And you know, separating, he'll say, I'm fine, I've got an okay life, but I'm choosing not to have a child with this condition. And so, you know, we learn about that. And so here's another example of, it doesn't mean you wouldn't choose that person or he wouldn't choose that life. Now, another cautionary tale, and if you have questions, we can go over those later about this, because this is a very important slide. But another cautionary tale is having a child who is unaffected can bring with it recurring feelings of grief. So I'm working with another mom, and so she just had a child who doesn't have the condition that her other child does, and she needs to process. She's like coming back to me to sort of say, I feel the grief all over again, because now I'm so happy with this baby, but it points out more than ever what my other child cannot do or what my other child won't achieve. And so you're sort of mourning, you're sad, you're mourning what your child who is affected is not going to accomplish or achieve or live to see, or however you want to say it, even though you're so thankful that you have this unaffected child. And so there's this dichotomy and there's this struggle of this seesaw of feelings and emotions. And that comes with the comparisons. You know, women love to compare. We compare tangible things, and then we compare pregnancies, their birth story, the initial months. Did your child do this at this age or that age? And all these stories go back and forth. And now here you are in the kitchen comparing the two kids, the older one who's affected and not doing things, and the younger one who, you know, the hopes and dreams will be met. And so there's this just emotional confusion. And so some would refer to this as parenting in the shadow of grief. You're parenting, but there's this shadow of sadness that resurfaces and that you live with. So, you know, the take-home message is really, whatever you decide, it's going to be okay, and it's going to be the right decision for your family, because you're going to entertain the decision, wear some hats, listen to each other, seek counsel and support as needed, and give it time. And you can change your decision. And all the little things that I taught you or spoke about, and helped you to think about, you will do that. And then you will know, when I come out on the other side of this, I'm going to be okay. And find somebody to talk to, somebody that you trust, and then trust yourself, trust yourselves. And listen. The most important thing when people are making decisions and talking about these confidential topics and sharing their emotions and what's in their heart and their mind is to be a good listener, find a good listener, and encourage your partner to listen. And it's okay to remind your partner. It's okay to say, wait, did you just hear what I said? And that's okay. And that goes with knowing you'll make the right decision. And so I'm on the professional advisory board with Courageous Parents Network, and really thankful for that as well. And I want to thank them again. And so there's their contact, and here's a little bit of my contact and my private practice. And that's really, what we wanted to share with you today.
Thank you, Mary Frances. Thank you very, very much. There was so much in what you said that I remember from my own journey with my husband, and our decision to have our third pregnancy. And ultimately we went with the CVS test because we were prepared. We had the conversation that if we had an affected pregnancy, well, it doesn't matter what we were going to decide, but that was the route we chose. The thing that I just want to say, and then I think we need to hear from Max and Toby, is this thing about comparing your children was so interesting to me, because when you have a child who's affected, you don't know what part of what you're seeing is their temperament versus what part of what you're seeing is the condition that they have. And so then when you compare them with your typical child, you're like, well, my typical child's so much more talkative, or my typical child is so much more, obviously the things that are ambulatory or physically related. But in some cases, it feels like sort of not a helpful road to go down at all, because it's impossible. In a lot of these instances, you can't tease out how much of it is the condition and how much of it is just who this little person would be regardless.
Some of it is personality, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved Mary's part about putting on different hats and trying them on and seeing how they feel. And I think that's really important now, as parents are offered a lot more choices than we were 20 years ago, Blythe, because the technology is so different. But I know it was 7 months between Ben's diagnosis and I was pregnant with my daughter, Isabel. And at the time, the only technology available to my son's genetic disorder was to have an amniocentesis. But with some nudging, my husband and I did try on some of those hats. We, in fact, did speak to an adoption agency and looked at what the risks were when adopting a child. We did go in and consider sperm donation, and even went as far as looking at photos to see if we could find somebody who looked closer to my husband, and then weighed those risks, because we understood that we could still have a child affected by something, because there's so many conditions that aren't screened, and we tried on all those hats. And I think that I'm a little overwhelmed now when I think about how quickly I went from hat to hat to hat to hat. Before making a decision. And I probably would counsel somebody to say, slow down and be more reflective, as Mary said, in between the hats. But I think that helped me along the path of ultimately making the choice to, as I say, roll the dice. And my daughter would tell you, she calls herself the child of luck herself, and has written about that. So.
Toby or Max, do you have any questions or observations?
Can we turn the recording off at this point?
Yeah.
Yes, I will stop recording.